It was supposed to be just another morning in Texas. Veteran Jesse Callahan headed out to check the ranch fences. Instead, he found three foals, exhausted, bound, and abandoned under the scorching desert sun. As Jesse knelt to cut the last rope, he had no idea that moment would pull him into a chilling secret, where life, death, and trust were traded like damaged goods. And the fight had only begun. The desert wind rose in waves of searing heat, like an ancient curse still clinging to the land of Rustwood, Texas, a place even God seemed to have turned his back on. The late summer sun struck the rusting tin roof of the Callahan Ranch like silent hammer blows, wrinkling memories as it scorched the metal. Alone in a red-dusted field, Jesse Callahan stood beneath the sparse shade of an old mesquite tree, sweat clinging to his neck and wrists as his hand gripped a snapped strand of barbed wire. He'd lived here for nearly a year, ever since retiring from 2 decades of military service scattered across the Middle East. But returning to his roots hadn't brought back anything like the childhood he remembered. Just emptiness, doubt, and sleepless nights. His mother had passed young. His father died while Jesse was still in Fallujah. The Rustwood Ranch wasn't left to him as a gift. It was more like a burden the world had decided to drop on the shoulders of a man already worn thin. That morning, Jesse had risen early out of old military habit, before the sky had shaken off its ashen purple. He drove his beat-up pickup toward the western fence line, planning to check the spot that had collapsed overnight. No radio, no sad country songs to drown out the echoes in his head. Just the low rumble of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. And then, he heard something stranger than wind, a sound as faint as a final breath. Jesse killed the engine, letting silence wrap around the truck like a blanket. At first, there was nothing, just the stillness of morning, as always. But then, a soft moan, like breath caught between 2 heartbeats, a weak rasp, then silence again. He stepped out, boots hitting the dry, crusted earth, eyes narrowing toward a patch of low brush a few dozen yards away. "Anyone out there?" Jesse called, voice rasped from dust and disuse. No answer, only a crosswind tugging at his ear, carrying with it a scent, sharp and metallic, like old blood and soaked sweat. Jesse's stomach turned. He'd smelled that before, in Mosul, dragging a wounded buddy from the rubble. That was the scent of survival bleeding out. He moved toward the sound, weaving through brittle weeds and fresh deer tracks. Then he saw them. 3 small shapes lay half-buried in red dust and sunlight, scraped skin, ribs poking through filthy coats. Each one bound with coarse rope, deep gashes where the fibers had cut into flesh, some wounds already crusted black. Their eyes were open wide, not with hope, but because they no longer had the strength to blink. Jesse froze as if he'd just stepped on a mine. His heart slammed in his chest. For half a minute, he couldn't move. Then his instincts kicked in. Battle mode. Assess. Plan. Execute. He dropped to one knee, inspecting the knots and scanning the area. This wasn't a trap for wild animals. This was human. He pulled the folding knife from his belt, gently slicing at the first knot. The foal was deep brown with bright, terrified eyes. The rope was wound around its belly and legs, dried blood sticking like glue. Jesse whispered, "Easy now, kid. I'm not the one who did this." His voice wasn't the voice of a man used to talking to horses. It was the voice of a soldier speaking to a dying comrade. The second one was smaller, with a smoky gray coat and a stare full of defiance, like it was daring him to try. Jesse cut the rope, never breaking eye contact as the foal's ears twitched. Once free, it collapsed briefly, then slowly pushed itself to its feet. Its eyes locked on him, not thankful, but warning. "I'm not dead yet." The last one lay motionless, pale cream coat, back legs tinged with purple. Jesse lifted it carefully, feeling the faint heartbeat against his chest, like holding a handful of ashes, like holding his own broken self, fresh off the battlefield, eyes hollow, spirit cracked. Back at the old storage barn he'd turned into a makeshift shelter, Jesse laid out straw, poured water, and made desperate calls. No answer from the local rescue center. The animal protection group out of town didn't return his call for half a day. When they finally did, they said, "We're full, sorry." Jesse hung up without a word. That night, he sat curled in the barn, flashlight swaying from a hook, watching the 3 fragile souls breathe. One blinked, one twitched an ear, one tried to rise, then gave up. He didn't know what he was doing. He'd never raised horses, never treated wounds, But he knew life, and he knew he couldn't walk away. 3 days later, when they started nibbling at dry grass and sipping water, Jesse gave them names. The gray one, the leader, the fighter, he named Flint. The brown one, curious and quick on its feet, became Blaze. And the weakest, those wide, unblinking eyes that wouldn't let him look away, he named Daisy. Daisy, like the rag doll his baby sister carried everywhere before she died in a car accident at 7. On the 5th night, Jesse leaned against a hay bale, watching Flint stand sentry at the stall, Blaze doze off, and Daisy whimper in her sleep. He chuckled. A dry, cracked sound, the first laugh in months. In that dusty barn where time had stopped, beneath the sound of crickets and soft, steady breathing, Jesse whispered, "No one chose you three, but I did." He didn't know where this road would lead, but he knew that day, the one where he stopped his truck in the middle of the desert, was the day everything changed. The Texas sun hadn't yet climbed high, but its weight was already pressing down on the rusted tin roof of the Rustwood barn. In the patchy shade beneath the patched-up structure, Jesse Callahan stepped in cautiously, carrying a bucket of milk replacer, something he'd driven nearly 30 miles down a crumbling dirt road to find at an abandoned cattle farm to the south. Blaze was the first to stand, though his hind legs still wobbled. He caught the scent from afar, sniffing the air like a curious pup. Daisy stayed curled in the straw, eyes wet, not quite afraid, but something deeper, waiting. And Flint, always Flint, stood at the back of the stall like a silent gatekeeper. Ears pricked, eyes narrow, watching every move Jesse made. Jesse poured the milk into a plastic trough, laid a small pile of hay beside it, and stepped back. He didn't coax, he didn't sweet-talk. He knew that every movement, every breath he took was a wordless message. "I'm not here to hurt you." And he knew it would take time for the message to mean anything to them. One blazing afternoon, Jesse returned to the spot where he'd found the foals. He had to know. Why there? Why tie them up in a place with no shade, no water, no chance? He parked on the edge of the red dirt stretch, stepping slowly like he was back at a crime scene. Wind and dust had erased most traces, but not everything. A wooden stake painted red still jutted out of the ground a few yards from where he'd rescued Daisy. Stamped on it, faded but still legible, Batch B47, WGI property. Below that, a long string of numbers, nearly erased by time and sun. Jesse froze. That name stirred something buried deep. A memory of his father snapping into a phone late one night when Jesse was just 15. "I don't care about batch numbers or evaluations," his father had barked. "If they're sick, destroy them. If not, leave them the hell alone." When Jesse asked, the old man dismissed it. "Just ranch talk," he'd said. Then silence. This time, Jesse pulled the stake from the ground. He brought it home and laid it on the old wooden table inside the main house, the same table where his father used to plan the planting seasons. 4 days later, an unfamiliar vehicle rolled up to the ranch gate. Jesse was cleaning Blaze's wound when he heard the engine idle. He looked up. A silver-gray car, temporary plates, no dust. Definitely not local. A man stepped out, crisp white shirt, slicked back hair, dark sunglasses that reflected the harsh sun. Carrying a leather case, he walked straight toward the barn. "Mr. Callahan," the man greeted, voice smooth and painfully polite. "Trevor Langston, Regional Representative for the Western Genetics Initiative, WGI. I believe you've come across 3 of our animals, Batch B47. I'm here to retrieve them." Jesse didn't move. He wiped his hands on a rag, set down the medicine bottle, and stepped in front of the barn door. "You're here for the foals?" 3 of them. Gray, brown, cream, all chipped. We have documentation. Jesse gave a dry laugh. "I found them tied up in a trap. No food, no water, starving. Nothing about that looked legal." Trevor didn't flinch. "We're not here to debate circumstances. Legally, those animals are property of WGI. I'm obligated to return them to our research facility in El Paso." Jesse crossed his arms. "They're not leaving here, not without a court order. And if your organization wants to take them, you better come back with one, not a sales pitch." Trevor hesitated, then pulled out a sheet of paper, holding it toward Jesse. "These are the batch files for B47. As you can see, they're genetically unsuitable. Behavioral issues, defects. They're marked as non-viable. We have the right." "The right?" Jesse snapped. "To starve them to death? Bury them alive?" Silence hung between them, heavy and sharp. "We'll return," Trevor said coolly, as if confirming a delivery time. Go ahead, try. As the car pulled away in a haze of dust, Jesse's pulse pounded in his neck. Back inside, he rummaged through his father's old desk drawers. Digging past yellowed bills and forgotten receipts, he found it. A rusted tin box filled with old documents, faded faxes, genetic charts, lot numbers. Bloodfire line B47, low resistance ratio, unstable temperament, not fit for breeding. And scrawled in red ink, barely legible. Daisy looked her in the eyes. I couldn't do it. But WGI says emotion isn't in the contract. Jesse's jaw clenched. His father had known. Maybe even helped. Maybe it was to keep the ranch, to avoid losing everything. But it meant he'd turned a blind eye while innocent lives were stamped for disposal. Jesse couldn't change the past, but he could protect the present. He collected every photo, every medical note, every injury report, Flint's limp, Blaze's scars, Daisy's haunted eyes, and stuffed them into a thick envelope. Then he drove into town. The sheriff's office sat beside an old auto shop, its wooden sign faded and splintered. Sheriff Lou Kramer, a man with 4 decades on the badge, looked up through thick lenses. Jesse Callahan? Been a while. I've got something, and I've got proof. Lou listened without interrupting, without hurrying. When Jesse slid the envelope across the desk, the sheriff took his time opening it. When he reached Daisy's photo, her eyes wide, her legs swollen and crusted with blood, Lou stared. Jesus, who would do that to a fool? WGI, Jesse said, I need you to keep these. If anything happens, let there be a record. Lou didn't promise anything, he just nodded. But Jesse knew that was enough. Back at home, the sky was fading into dusk. Blaze was munching straw. Daisy had dozed off. And Flint just stood there, watching Jesse with unreadable eyes. Jesse sat down in front of him, eye to eye. I don't know what they'll do next, he whispered. But this time, they're not taking you. Flint didn't move, but he stepped forward, 1 step, no retreat. It was the only agreement the stubborn colt would ever offer. And to a soldier like Jesse, that was all the reason he needed to fight. Night in Rustwood wasn't like anywhere Jesse had ever known. No city lights, no traffic noise, just the hum of insects drifting across dry fields and the whisper of wind tapping against the tin roof. In the heavy darkness, every sound came alive, sharper, deeper. As if the night itself were speaking an ancient language only survivors of war could understand. Jesse lay on an old cot just inside the barn wall, hand resting near a loaded hunting rifle, eyes fixed on the jagged wooden ceiling. Blaze breathed softly on the other side of the partition, occasionally licking his lips or snorting. Daisy curled up tight, sometimes letting out kitten-like snores. But Flint hadn't moved since dusk. He stood guard near the stall door, watching the barren yard beyond, where nothing stirred but scorched grass and weathered fence posts. Jesse had learned one thing about Flint. He didn't trust easily. Not like Blaze, not like Daisy. He observed. He waited. And behind his stillness, there was a storm. It was near midnight when Jesse finally dozed off. But like most veterans, his sleep never ran deep. Even the slightest noise could snap him awake. Tonight, it was the sound of a latch shifting. He opened his eyes. A faint creak, the subtle grind of a hinge. Breathing, too shallow, too deliberate to belong to a horse. Jesse bolted upright, rifle in hand. He didn't switch on a light. In moments like this, light made you a target. He moved quietly toward the rear of the barn, body low, step silent. His eyes had adjusted to the dark. He held his breath, listening. Then he saw him. A shadow, a slim man in a cap, crouched by the back door, prying it open with a metal rod. A small flashlight was gripped between his teeth, casting shaky light across a face Jesse didn't recognize. But there was something worn about the man, experienced. This wasn't just a petty thief. Jesse was about to speak when another sound cut through the dark, the stomp of hooves. A low growl. Flint, the foal, still young, still bandaged, let out a guttural snort like a wolf pup. His ears were stiff, eyes blazing. He slammed a hoof against the wooden floor with a crack like a hammer. Blaze stirred, letting out a nervous whinny. Daisy scrambled up, wobbly and startled. The intruder flinched. He turned, startled, tripped and smacked his shoulder into the stall wall. Jesse rushed forward, gun raised. Don't move, Jesse shouted. The man stumbled back, hands raised. I'm unarmed. I swear, I'm just here to collect the horses. I didn't mean trouble. Jesse kept the rifle trained. Who sent you? WGI. They said they were rejects. Just need 'em back to dispose of. I don't know more than that. Dispose? Jesse hissed. You mean kill? The man said nothing. His eyes flicked between Jesse and Flint, who now blocked the exit. Even with his legs still wrapped in gauze, Flint stood like a statue carved from war. His gaze locked onto the man with unflinching force. Jesse narrowed his eyes. I already told your people. If they want to take these animals, they'll have to go through me. Look, the man stammered. I'm just a hired hand. You don't get it. WGI's not some mom-and-pop shop. They've got lawyers, insiders. If you keep those foals, they'll drag you into court. You'll lose everything. Jesse reached for a nearby rope and tied the man's hands. I've faced worse than WGI. In Afghanistan, we had no names, no country, no backup. But we had each other. Now I've got these three. Flint let out a piercing whinny, as if in agreement. The next morning, Jesse delivered the intruder to Sheriff Kramer. The old man looked at the stranger, then at Jesse, saying nothing, but his grip on his sidearm was firmer than usual. You think more are coming? Jesse asked. Kramer nodded. They want to scrub this whole thing clean. And now you are the mess. Jesse offered a dry smile. Then I'll be messy as hell. Back home, he began installing cameras, used ones, bought cheap from a swap meet, but good enough. He reinforced the stall, built an extra layer of fencing. At night, he slept beside the barn, the rifle never far. But the biggest change came from Flint. After that night, he no longer stayed apart. When Jesse entered, he didn't back away. When Jesse placed a hand on his shoulder, Flint tilted his head, not in fear but in contemplation. Then, for the first time, he allowed Jesse to scratch behind his ear. It wasn't surrender. It was a silent nod. I trust you. A little. Jesse was beginning to understand. Flint wasn't just a foal. He was the product of a bloodline WGI had tried to create, then tossed aside when he didn't meet expectations. Somewhere in his DNA were speed, stamina, and maybe even rebellion. But what Flint had, what WGI could never measure, was an unbreakable will to live. Blaze was innocent. Daisy was afraid. But Flint was the gatekeeper. As night fell again, Jesse sat inside the stall, back to the wall. The three foals lay close, still thin, still healing, but no longer fading, Jesse whispered, barely a prayer. I couldn't save my brothers in war, but this time I'll keep you alive, even if the sky falls. Flint opened one eye. In the low lamplight, his dusty gray coat shimmered faintly, like untempered steel. Jesse knew. The real battle had only just begun. Mornings in Rustwood were never noisy, just the call of a mockingbird from somewhere among the bare-limbed pines and the soft tap of Blaze's hooves against the wooden floor when he got hungry. Daisy remained cautious, seldom leaving her corner of the stall. But Flint was a different story. Ever since the night of the break-in, he'd become a sealed gate of steel, alert, solemn, never sleeping too deeply again. Jesse sat at his father's old desk, its oak surface faded by time and covered in a fine layer of dust. Sunlight streamed through a cracked window, casting trembling leaf shadows across the papers. In his hands was a stack of old files, documents he'd avoided since his father passed. He'd always thought he understood the man, a gruff, quiet figure who lived by rules, not emotions. But the more pages Jesse turned, the more he realized his father had left behind more than broken fences and tired barns. In the third drawer, beneath faded receipts and unsent letters, Jesse found a weathered leather folder. Inside were files marked clearly, WGI Batch Series B47, pages of genetic terminology, bloodline diagrams, and shipping orders. Tucked among the printed sheets was a handwritten note. The paper had browned with age. The handwriting was uneven, like it had been scrawled in the middle of a sleepless night. I couldn't look Daisy in the eye, but they said it had to be done. If I refused, they'd pull funding. The ranch would die. I had no choice. Jesse's grip tightened. His hands shook. Daisy, the quiet little foal hiding in the corner stall, her brown eyes heavy with grief, had once looked into his father's eyes. And the man had turned away. His father's silence had been a sentence. Jesse wasn't a saint. He'd done things in war he still couldn't speak about. But this was blood. This was life. These were living beings thrown into a death trap by the very hands that once fed them. He folded the letter, slipped it into his jacket, and pulled out his phone. He called Sheriff Lou Kramer. "This is Lou. It's Jesse. I've got something you need to see." Kramer arrived that afternoon. His old pickup rumbled down the gravel path and parked beside the dried-up well. He said nothing as Jesse handed over the file, just read each page, jaw tightening. He paused longest at the handwritten letter. Your old man was a good man, Kramer said quietly, but even good men break. Jesse sat on the porch steps, nursing a cold coffee. And their kids pay the price. Kramer sighed, drumming his fingers on the file cover. WGI used to be state-sponsored, genetic research on wild horses. Then they went private. I wasn't sheriff yet, but I remember the rumors. One batch of Mustangs got restructured. No one ever said what that meant. Jesse frowned. Restructured? Pretty words for disposal, Kramer muttered. I'm going to forward all of this to the state's animal welfare office. And Jesse? If what you're saying holds up, WGI is looking at a serious violation of animal protection laws. But I've got to warn you, they've got money, lawyers, clout. They won't sit still. Jesse looked toward the pasture where Blaze was trotting circles around Flint. Daisy napped beneath a mesquite, her ears twitching in the breeze. I don't care what they've got, Jesse said. I've got 3 lives worth saving. After Kramer left, Jesse returned to the barn. He laid down fresh straw, swapped in clean water, then stood quietly, watching Flint. My father had the chance to save you, he said softly. He didn't, but I will. Flint didn't turn, but he stepped forward, slow, deliberate. When he was just a breath away, Jesse reached out his palm, and for the first time, Flint lowered his head into it. No recoil, no resentment, just acceptance. That night, Jesse lit the oil lamp in the old office and began reading through every document. He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed allies, the press, animal advocacy groups. He needed to prove to the world that Flint, Daisy, and Blaze weren't broken genetic mistakes, but stolen lives. He opened his laptop and typed out an email to the American Wild Horse Preservation Group. The subject line was plain: I need help. I have proof. He attached everything: photos of Flint's limp, pictures of the wire trap, the complete file on batch B47, and the letter from his father. Before hitting send, Jesse paused. His hand hovered over the keyboard, eyes blurry with emotion. There was one thing he'd never done, never forgiven his father. But tonight, as the wind swept through the cracked window, carrying the scent of straw and horsehair, Jesse understood. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing another path. He clicked send. And in a small house at the edge of a forgotten desert, a quiet war had just found its voice. That morning, the sky over Rustwood was unnervingly clear. Not a single cloud, not a whisper of wind. Just golden sunlight spread across the dry grass like spilled brass, and the sharp, rhythmic clang of Jesse hammering on the east gate. Daisy still kept to her quiet corner of the barn. Blaze, restless as ever, pawed the dirt and whinnied to be let out. Flint, true to form, paced the perimeter like a sentry, his eyes fixed on the fence line in the distance. Jesse had just wiped sweat from his brow when he heard it. A low, heavy engine, the kind that didn't belong on these dusty back roads. Not a neighbor's truck, not a sheriff's cruiser. This one was deeper, slower, colder, like a hammer against an empty oil drum. A black truck rolled up to the ranch gate, big, polished, towing a steel trailer. Jesse dropped his hammer and moved fast. His heart kicked hard in his chest. Flint let out a low growl deep in his throat. Blaze backed up. Daisy didn't move, but Jesse could tell she was holding her breath. The truck stopped. Dust curled around its tires like waking ghosts. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out, sharp creased black shirt, matching hat and boots, everything gleaming like a showroom floor. His face was still, emotionless, eyes like a man used to giving orders and never hearing no. Jesse met him halfway, fingers brushing the wooden gate latch, never breaking eye contact. Morning, the man said, voice like smooth gravel. Name's Silas Granger, Southwest Regional Director for the Western Genetics Initiative. Jesse didn't offer a handshake, he just stood tall, jaw tight. You're lost, Jesse said flatly. Granger smiled without warmth, sliding his hands into his coat pockets. On the contrary, I'm exactly where I need to be. I've come for our property, 3 Mustangs, batch B47, we have documentation. Jesse's jaw clenched. He'd known this day would come, just not so brazenly, not in broad daylight. Property? Jesse repeated. I found those foals in a trap, starving, bleeding, left to die. If that's how you treat property, maybe I should call animal control. Granger's expression didn't change. He turned and signaled to the 2 men inside the truck. They climbed out, one with a tranquilizer case, the other unlocking the trailer gate to reveal metal restraints, halters, even small muzzles. Blaze shrieked inside the barn. Flint let out a warning snort, ears pinned flat, hooves striking the stall floor like war drums. Daisy didn't move, but Jessie could see the tremble under her pale coat. "I'm not here to debate," Granger said, voice lower now. "Orders are to retrieve the animals, the easy way or not." Jessie didn't raise his rifle. He didn't yell. He simply stepped into the path between the barn and the intruders, hand resting on the rope that latched the gate. "They're not going anywhere," Jessie said, voice solid as stone. "Not unless a judge says otherwise, and if you try to take them off my land, you'll be trespassing." The silence that followed was tight as a drawn bow. Granger studied him, not angry, not flustered, calculating. "How long do you think you can hold out?" he asked. "WGI has lawyers, contracts. You're just a lonely vet on a dead ranch with 3 unwanted animals." Jessie said nothing. Flint stepped up beside him, head low, shoulders squared like a soldier bracing for a firefight. Granger exhaled slowly. "Very well, we'll return, with court orders. Or maybe without them." He turned, gestured his men back. The cage doors slammed shut. The engine revved. Just before climbing into the cab, Granger glanced back one last time. "But I'll tell you now, this doesn't end here." The black truck rolled away, leaving behind a swirl of dust like a threat carved into the air. Jessie stood there, sweat cold against his spine. He could hear Blaze huffing. Flint remained a statue. Daisy lifted her head slowly, eyes wide with a fear she couldn't name. Inside the barn, Jessie ran his hand down Flint's neck. The colt trembled for a beat, then steadied. Jessie looked around. The barn wasn't a shelter anymore. It was a battlefield. This wasn't about pity anymore. Not just about saving a few animals. This was a standoff now. A man against a machine. That night, Jessie dragged his cot next to the barn door. He placed his loaded shotgun beside him, eyes scanning the open field. Flint stayed at the door, ears alert. Blaze rested nearby, ears twitching. Daisy nestled deeper into the hay, but she wasn't trembling. Jessie scribbled one line in his notebook. "If I'm not here tomorrow, at least I tried." Then he set the pen down, leaned back against the wood, and listened to the rhythm of 3 small chests breathing in the dark, like the beating of his own heart. They weren't alone anymore. And neither was he. The next morning, Sheriff Kramer called. "Jessie," he said, voice clipped, "I've forwarded the files to the State Animal Protection Office. But listen, WGI's moving fast, lobbying hard. They might not come through the front door next time. Might be lawyers, might be worse." Jessie didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." And for the first time in years, he didn't say it like a soldier going to war. He said it like a father, ready to protect the 3 lives fate had left in his care. The first news came on a gusty afternoon. Sheriff Kramer called back after Jessie had sent the entire file, photos of wounds, trap wire, even the papers bearing his father's signature. "We passed everything to the State Animal Welfare Office," Kramer said, voice steady but carrying something beneath it, a quiet urgency. "And some reporters have started asking questions." "Reporters?" Jessie raised an eyebrow. "Local journalist, name's Riley, sharp one, says she got photos from a rescue group. Heard the story through the grapevine, not from me. But Jessie, if you want to protect them, the best way is to let people know." Jessie looked out toward the pasture. Flint stood near the fence line, his silver-gray mane blowing in the wind, eyes distant, like he was waiting for something beyond the horizon. Daisy was nestled behind a brush pile, nibbling dry grass. Blaze ran joyful circles, untiring as a child on summer break. "I'm not looking to be a hero," Jessie said quietly. "I just want to do right by them." "You don't need to be a hero," Kramer replied. "You just need to tell the truth." A week later, the front page of the New Mexico Chronicle carried a headline that wasn't flashy, but hit like a hammer. 3 Mustangs abandoned in the desert, and the veteran who refused to look away. The lead photo showed Flint standing in front of Jessie, head lowered slightly, eyes locked on the lens, not afraid but defiant. Behind him, Blaze danced mid-leap. Daisy stood partially in shadow, her soft cream coat aglow in the sun. Within hours, the story spread across social media. Thousands shared it, comments poured in. "They're not just horses, they're discarded lives. Can't believe this is happening in America in 2025. Protect Jessie and those babies at all costs." A crowdfunding page popped up without Jessie's knowledge. In just 2 days, it raised over $15,000. Jessie didn't touch a cent. He redirected every dollar to wild horse rescues in need of food and medicine. But what mattered more than the money was the spotlight. For the first time in years, Jesse saw people care. Not because he'd served overseas, not because of any medals, but because of the 3 fragile souls he refused to abandon. Then came a letter. Handwritten, careful cursive full of intent. It was from a therapeutic riding center called Sunrise Meadow, based in Arizona. They'd seen the article. "We believe Blaze, given his playful nature and affinity for people, could be a bridge for children on the autism spectrum," the letter read. "If possible, we'd like to visit, and if conditions allow, we hope to welcome Blaze as a therapy companion." Jesse read it twice, then a third time. He looked over at Blaze, chasing a butterfly near the fence, tail flicking like it had its own mind. The day the Sunrise Meadow team arrived, they were led by a silver-haired woman with honey-colored eyes that had clearly weathered sorrow. Beside her was a boy, maybe 9 years old, thin, headphones over his ears, staring at the ground. Jesse didn't say much. He just opened the barn gate. Blaze trotted out, hesitated at the unfamiliar faces, then lifted his head and walked toward the boy, like he already knew who needed him. The child didn't speak, didn't move. But when Blaze gently pressed his muzzle to the boy's hand and let out a soft breath, something broke open. The boy laughed, a shaky, unsure laugh, but a laugh all the same. His mother behind him burst into tears. The woman from Sunrise Meadow gripped Jesse's hand. "One moment like that, Jesse," she said, voice cracking, "is all the reason we do this." When Blaze left the ranch, Jesse touched noses with him 3 times, once for goodbye, once for pride, and once for love. Flint watched from a distance. Daisy let out a small, soft whinny, like waving goodbye without hands. Blaze turned one last time before stepping into the trailer. No fear, no resistance, just a look, one that said, "I'm okay, and you will be too." Less than a week later, a woman knocked on Jesse's door. Her name was Agnes Harper, over 70, hair like silver waves, walked slow like she carried decades behind her. "I lost my husband last year," she said softly. "He used to ride every morning, every night. I didn't think I'd feel anything again until I read about Daisy." Jesse led her to the stall. Daisy stayed curled at first, hesitant, but when Agnes sat quietly, didn't speak, just rested her hand on the fence rail, Daisy walked forward, pressed her velvet muzzle against the woman's hand. Agnes smiled, a fragile, trembling smile. "That look in her eyes, it's just like his," she whispered. "Sad, but still fighting." Jesse didn't ask for more. He filled out the forms. 2 days later, Daisy left for a small homestead in northern New Mexico. Jesse stood at the gate watching her go. His heart felt lighter and heavier, like something vital had been pulled from him, but he'd given it freely. Only Flint remained. Flint didn't question where the others went. He didn't protest, but he grew quieter, paced less, stared longer at the open fields. Jesse didn't explain. He just waited. Then one evening, as the sky burned pink, Flint walked up to Jesse on his own, rested his forehead gently against the man's shoulder, not with challenge, not with fear, but with something quieter. "I'm staying." And Jesse understood. They had chosen each other. The pressure on WGI mounted. The state animal office launched a formal investigation. Journalists from Austin and Denver began unearthing old records. The name Clayton Rowe, regional executive, surfaced alongside internal memos referencing non-viable stock elimination. Batch B47, Flint's group, became the flashpoint. Amid growing outrage, WGI was forced to shut down multiple facilities. Granger, the man who had come to the gate, vanished without a trace. But Jesse knew silence didn't mean safety, so he kept the barn locked each night. Let Flint sleep near the door, left the lantern burning as a signal into the dark. One late evening, Jesse received a message from Sunrise Meadow. They included a short video. Blaze ran in soft circles around a paddock, a boy riding atop him, arms outstretched like wings, laughter ringing out. "Blaze isn't just helping that boy," the note said. "He's teaching all of us to believe again." A week later, a letter came from Agnes. A photo, Daisy asleep by the fence, her head resting on the old woman's lap. "I finally slept without pills for the first time since he passed," the caption read. Jesse printed both photos. He pinned them beside the desk where he kept his journals. Underneath them, he wrote, "From genetic waste to the last light." And Flint, the last foal left, stood quietly by the window, watching Jesse write. No longer wild, no longer afraid, but something else entirely. a soul that had chosen to stay. It had been 2 years since Jesse Callahan knelt in the desert sun and cut the last rope from a dying foal's legs. 2 years, not long enough to forget, but just enough for the wounds that once bled to finally begin to scar. And in the quiet stretch of land known as Rustwood Ranch, a place once thought forsaken, each new morning now arrived with the soft rhythm of breathing, the scuff of hooves on dry ground, and sometimes the low laugh of a man who once believed he'd lost his reason to live. WGI had been sued. They lost their license in at least 3 states. The media flayed them open. Advocacy groups exposed their lies. They scrambled to save face with glossy apologies and promises of reform that read more like luxury car ads than justice. But no one believed them anymore. Not after the world saw Flint, Blaze, and Daisy. The court battle wasn't over. American justice moves slow, but once in motion, it doesn't stop easily. While lawyers and investigators picked through WGI's secrets, back on a dry patch of Texas soil, Jesse Callahan and a gray Mustang named Flint were walking a different kind of path. A path of healing, of connection. Jesse no longer jumped at every engine sound near his gate. He still checked the fence lines every morning, still locked the barn every night, but not with the same fear. He no longer carried the old rifle. Now he carried a notebook and a few horse treats, because Flint had developed a liking for oatmeal cookies. Flint had grown, tall, lean, powerful. His silver mane now flowed down to his shoulders. But it wasn't his form people remembered. It was his eyes. Eyes that looked older than any horse had a right to be, like he'd lived a dozen lifetimes. Like he could see pain before it spoke. Like he knew when someone needed someone to stand beside them and not say a word. Jesse started accepting invitations from schools, recovery centers, orphanages, even veteran hospitals. He didn't do tricks. He didn't give flashy speeches. He just told a story in a slow, even voice about the day he didn't walk away. He told it differently each time. To kids, it was a fairy tale. 3 brave foals who escaped the bad men. To adults, it was a truth bomb. A breeding program that forgot life isn't measured by gene sequencing. To veterans, he simply said, "I saw the eyes that once pulled me back from the edge, again in a foal on the brink." And somehow, Flint always knew where to stand, when to nod, when to lean in so a shaking hand could find him. Once, at a rehab center for young soldiers returning from the Middle East, Flint approached a man in a wheelchair, legs gone, voice silent for 3 weeks. Doctors said he'd shut down. Flint lowered his head, rested it lightly on the soldier's shoulder, like a blanket made of breath. The man cried. Then he said, "He didn't leave me." The first words in 21 days. In the spring of their 2nd year, Jesse and Flint attended a healing conference in Santa Fe. No flashy booth, no banners, just 4 folding chairs and a photo. Flint in the foreground, Blaze running behind, Daisy sleeping beside Agnes's porch. A little girl, maybe 8, pigtails and thick glasses, stood in front of Flint for a long time. Then she looked up at Jesse. "Is Flint your horse?" Jesse smiled. He knelt to meet her eyes and said, "No, I'm Flint's person." She tilted her head, confused, then giggled. "So you're best friends?" Jesse chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Yeah, and when your best friend is sad, you stay. And when you're sad, they stay too." Flint gave a slow, deliberate nod, like he understood every word. The days passed. Dry season came and went. Each morning, Jesse opened the barn door. Flint stepped out, took a deep breath, and walked beside him like an old friend surveying their land. Rustwood was no longer a haunted ranch. No longer his father's shadow, it was home. Sometimes Blaze sent postcards from Arizona, pulling therapy carts for kids, wearing flower garlands at festivals. Daisy, too, curled beneath Agnes's rocking chair, beneath a sky full of sparrows. But Jesse knew Flint was the tether. The anchor, the one who stayed. One summer evening, Jesse opened the gate, but didn't call Flint. He just stood there, hands in pockets, watching the golden fields stretch west. The wind carried dust and the scent of sagebrush. And something else, a wildness only those who'd lived through it could recognize. Flint stepped out slowly, came to Jesse's side, rested his forehead on the man's shoulder. No words, no music, no cameras, just 2 beings, one man who had broken in war and one horse once labeled waste, leaning on each other like 2 halves of a story no one else could write. Jesse placed a hand on Flint's neck. Warm, steady. "We're still here, buddy," he whispered, "and we're not going anywhere. Somewhere out there a storm might still be forming, WGI might not be done. Maybe another letter would come, a subpoena, a threat. But Jesse wasn't afraid, because he knew he was no longer alone. And Flint, the gray colt once doomed to disappear, was no longer a survivor. He was proof. Proof that sometimes the lives the world throws away are the very ones that can change everything. If you believe that some wild souls weren't just born to survive, but to lead us home, drop a 1 in the comments below. If you've ever witnessed a bond that crossed every boundary between human and animal, type 0. And if the journey of Jesse, Flint, Blaze, and Daisy made your heart ache in all the right ways, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the stories still to come, where life, loyalty, and freedom are told through the eyes of those who can never be tamed.